Hi there, it is August the 4th, Wednesday. I'm Fox 35 Storm Team meteorologist Brooks Garner with meteorologist Laurel Blanchard, and we want to give you a tropical update. We've got a lot going on out there, but an interesting lull in the action, Laurel, considering that we right now are in the peak of the hurricane season.
Yes, peak is September 10th, so we're coming up on that in just a few days, actually. But even though we are in this little bit of a lull, we are still watching a couple of zones, but we still have, what, 60% of the tropical season to get through?
That's right. So what's going on right now?
So we are watching 3 zones at the moment. So let's take you a little bit closer to home and then work our way eastward. So we right now are going to be keeping an eye on these 3 zones across the Atlantic. Let's start with this 30% zone over here, moving into the Gulf of Mexico and even further into the coast of Mexico as we take a little bit further look eastward. This zone right here is what we're watching. This little bit of a trough is what we're keeping an eye on that once again has a 30% chance of some sort of tropical development within the next 7 days. Let's take you to the central Atlantic right here. We are watching this trough over here that if it does move into this zone, only a 10% chance of seeing some sort of tropical development within the next 7 days. And one more zone just making its way off the coast of Africa in this 20% zone right here of where it has a little bit of tropical development possible within the next 7 days. So where are these troughs going? They're slowly going to start to make their way westward. And as they slowly start to make their way through the southern Caribbean, they could have the possibility to fire up a little bit, but really given the low percentages, doesn't really seem like too much. And we have a very hostile atmosphere of what we're keeping an eye on. And this is really what's causing this lull of why we're not really seeing any of these troughs fire up as we do take a look. So as Brooks is going to take you through why we're ultimately seeing this lull, we are going to be really keeping an eye on these 3 zones as we are really going to possibly see a couple changes in the atmosphere coming up.
And Laurel, a lot of folks are asking, you guys have talked about how this is going to be a hyperactive season. Where are the storms? What's going on here? Was this a bunch of hype? Was this a bad forecast? What is going on? Well, I think the key here to takeaway is that, listen, we haven't really achieved the peak of the hurricane season yet. In fact, this year it may be a little bit later. And so while I don't think we're going to see 18 more systems after this, we've had 5. I do think we could see 8 to 12. And out of those, they could be on the strong side. We still have over 60% of the hurricane season to get through. And yes, we have been in what almost seems like a somewhat unprecedented lull since Ernesto as we approach the peak of the season. And I want to show you why, what factors are going into that, and how these factors will eventually go away, leading to what could be a very active, if not delayed, peak in the hurricane season later on this month. So first and foremost, over in Africa, the coastal formation zone is too far north this season. And I want to spare you the deep technical meteorological breakdown, but we talk about tropical waves emerging from Africa. You might have even heard the term the monsoon trough. Well, in this case this season, it's too far north, and so as those tropical waves emerge from Africa, well, they roll over water that's too cold and air that's too dry for these waves to activate into a tropical cyclone or a tropical system. There's also too much wind aloft from a very busy, unusually busy African rainy season, their local monsoon season, producing beneficial rains for the Sahel region as well as parts of the Sahara. Very unusual in that sense. But what it's done is produced a lot of wind out of the east, tearing systems apart. But later in September, those winds are going to come out of the west, and that's going to kind of nullify that effect, allowing for lower wind shear and a better chance for systems to form. Also, it's warmer than normal significantly high up in the atmosphere, like at cruising altitude where jets fly at 30,000 feet. And this really warm air is attributable to a couple of factors. One could be that Tonga volcano that erupted in the South Pacific a couple of years ago, sending trillions of gallons of water up into the stratosphere, helping to warm it. Also, there are global warming effects. There's also just anomalies that happen, unusual features that happen in the stratosphere. What that's done is really capped the atmosphere. So locally, you don't get the rising air. Some of these tropical thunderstorms can have cloud tops over 65,000 feet. And if they can't really get much above 30,000 feet, they can't really form into strong systems. And on top of that, we have an overall hemispheric pattern over the Atlantic, which has been in effect for the last several weeks of an environment not favorable for storms to develop at all. It's more of a sinking pattern instead of a rising pattern. And that's called the Madden-Julian oscillation. You might have heard of the MJO. Whether you're a meteorologist watching this or someone at home, you know well what this term means. The MJO has been in a phase not conducive for systems to develop, but that's expected to change as we head into late September. So these 4 major factors coming together right now to essentially put a halt to our tropical season well, they may not be with us for very long, so we're going to enjoy this lull in the action. Over the next couple of weeks, Colorado State University is saying there's a chance here, a very likely chance, that we're going to remain below normal through about the middle of September. And that would correspond with and coincide with our expected change in our pattern as we head into the end of the season here, the end of the tropical season. A season featuring here locally from where we broadcast in Orlando of scattered storms and temperatures in the 90s. But coming up, Laurel, while we've got our afternoon monsoon here, right, our downpours, we got to keep a close eye on the tropics, because when those factors we showed you eventually go away, we could be looking at quite an active end of this month and early October, and possibly a hurricane season that as we head into November doesn't wind down but only continues to ramp up.
Yeah, we could see a couple of different scenarios, either one storm after another and really start to pick up those named storms and those counts, or we could see stronger named storms but also less named storms. So it's almost kind of a 50-50 of how things are really going to play out for the rest of the season.
Yeah, our peak of the hurricane season is statistically the week of September 10th. So it's roughly next week. It can last for a couple of weeks, but the way things have been going and the way the water is right now being so warm, either way you slice it, we're in a La Nina pattern right now developing in the Pacific, which overall means a lower wind shear over the Atlantic, and the waters of the Atlantic are really warm, so that could delay the onset of the peak of this hurricane season.
That's true, because those are really two parts of the recipe that could definitely allow for some hurricanes to form. But again, there are so many other factors that we have to look at that play a very big role in everything. So it's really just keeping an eye on those little things that create the big recipe of how this is going to play out. Yeah,
and this hurricane season was forecast to be hyperactive because of those factors. The La Nina reducing wind shear, and also the really, really unusually warm, record warm water temperatures. And that still could happen. We could still just see a later onset and storm after storm. So we really can't let our guard down. But I also want to tell you here, Laurel and I were looking at this. The Gulf of Mexico right now is warmer than it's ever been in recorded history. It's incredibly warm right now. And so we're focusing on those long track hurricanes coming in off of Africa. We've also got to watch out for some homegrown type systems, because, for instance, there's a chance as we head into a little bit later this week that we could see something trying to spin up here in the western Gulf of Mexico known as a homegrown system. It could be a tropical storm, and then from there, with the stationary front in place across the southeast, it could ride along those tracks in the sky and bring heavy rain into Florida. So there's a lot of questions here. I think the bottom line here is don't let your guard down. I'm confident we're going to see a ramp up in the hurricane season where we could have almost kind of an outbreak of storms developing toward the end of this month into early next month, in a time where people might be thinking about Halloween, not so much about the hurricane season.
And ultimately, we're only about just under halfway through the hurricane season, so we still have quite a bit to go. 60% of activity to go, so we are still in the heart of hurricane season, and still a lot can happen. So again, just don't let your guard down. Yeah, don't let your guard down. These factors we went over are the keys in determining the future here, not just in the short term, but in the long term. So stay with the Fox 35 Storm Team. If you're watching on YouTube, for instance, you haven't hit subscribe, be sure to do so. We have updates like this, inside scoop we don't have time for on TV, but our collective years of meteorological experience, specifically tracking hurricanes. After all, we're from Florida. I mean, this is what we do. It's kind of like up in Alaska, they specialize in snow. So stay with us, we'll have the latest on this, and then we'll continue to watch it and let you know as things might pop up throughout the season. Don't let your guard down, keep the hurricane kits topped off, and have the peace of mind of knowing you've got people in your ring hoping that nothing happens, but we'll let you know if it does. Have a great Wednesday.